does one become a famous photographer for the National Geographic? We'll tell you that on this episode.
We get some rum and beer, expensive, put in a reindeer, so you know we're gonna party.
Welcome back, Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew. It is wonderful. It is great. It is festive. It is Christmas, and I love it. And you know what happens during this time? It gets damn right cold, okay? It gets damn right cold. And Dr. Craken, we have a guest that's been in the cold.
He's been everywhere.
He's been everywhere. Yeah. But his book is called Icebergs to Iguanas. We have Jason Edwards. Jason, you have been working for National Geographic for 3 decades. That is incredible. And we're so honored that you contacted us and wanted to come on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
G'day, and thanks for having me.
We were having a little bit of a chat before we started recording, and your adventures are absolutely fabulous. You get to go to all these really exciting places like Antarctica and underwater and so forth. But how did it all start?
Yeah, seriously, because, you know, when you're kids, right, you're always looking at it and you're like, I want to do that. I want to take a picture. But like, how do you take the right picture, and what does the National Geographic really want? Because I feel like it's specific. Like, everyone can take a photograph, but obvious, you're being able to identify a story with your photograph.
Yeah, that's a great point, Scarlett. I mean, it's probably worth looking at the history. So I started shooting when I was 8 with my mum's Kodak canister camera, those little cameras that had the canister film in them. And I always drew and I painted in pencil and then eventually oil. So I was a surrealist, and back then I was so focused on, as I am now, what didn't belong in my compositions. Even as a kid, I was anally retentive about what didn't belong in my illustrations. So at 14, I used my paper round money to buy a camera, and I had pictures published off my 3rd roll of film.
Wow.
So as I went through school, I studied art the whole way through, but I also did all the sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, maths. And then when I finished, I actually got a job as a zookeeper at Melbourne Zoo at 18. And during that 12-year career, I was photographing all the animals there and using all of the money that I earned to buy cheap lenses and to fund my own adventures around the world and things like that. So whilst I was doing that, I actually built a stock agency. So people would contact the zoo and say, do you have a picture of this, or this? And they'd say, look, we've got this young guy, Jace, here's his phone number. There wasn't internet at that point. And people would ring me up and I would actually get the pictures published in books and magazines and so on and so forth. But I was pretty clever then, far cleverer than I am now. And I spent 6 months of my salary on a copyright lawyer, and he designed a brutal contract. And in that contract, and this is one of the things people should do now, is that if the people didn't put my name with the picture, I billed them 100% again. So people always published my name. And then eventually magazines started calling me saying, hey, will you do this story for us? Or you would do, you start out short, 2-hour assignment, 4-hour assignment, whatever the case might be. And fast forward, and eventually, 10, 15 years later, I cold called National Geographic and they put me through to the magazine, and the director of the photography at the magazine knew who I was.
That's crazy, but you were young. You were in college?
I was young, yeah.
What are you, the Steve Jobs of photographers? What is going on? I mean, we're talking about you were an entrepreneur in middle school and high school.
Yeah, so I broke ground early, and there was no mentors. I mean, Australia's such a small, geographically large, but such a small country population-wise. So there was no one to lean on. And it's not the Aussie way either, to have mentors so much. So, over the decades, I've really tried to mentor people because I realized how difficult it was to do it without someone there in my corner. But I guess I went hard. And you know what it's like with travel and science and conservation and the arts, you can become pretty damn focused at the expense of everything else and sometimes everyone else around you. So, it was one of those things that I was so passionate about that I was just determined to make it work. But I was also pretty insecure about my work. A lot of creatives are. So I waited until I thought I was ready to make that call. but they'd been watching me from afar, working for other Geographics and BBC and so on and so forth. So I think that patience for me paid out, because Geographic, to your point, Scarlett, it's all about storytelling. So people are so fixated now on what they can do with software, whether it's AI or Photoshop or Instagram or your phone, it doesn't matter. But the reality is Geographic doesn't care about that. They want to see the raw file. Did you capture the story in the raw?
Wow.
All these people go, I've learned all these skills and I'm great at this. No one cares. Well, like, I don't care. I shouldn't speak for everyone at Geographic, but the raw file is what counts. So if you can't get that story or that image right in the raw file, you're not even going to be in the game, let alone in the stadium to watch the game. You've got to be able to get that story right.
So going from that, and everyone has got a pretty good quality camera now on their phones, and people are taking photos of wildlife. Plus, also with AI images just going crazy over the last couple of years. I just saw a story about what a problem it's become for conservationists with fake videos of people petting polar bears and swimming with sharks and things like that. So
I know.
how is that influencing your industry at the moment?
Well, it's interesting, Kraken, because for me, and this might be just completely ostrich head in the sand kind of thing, which I don't think has ever been documented, but I don't let that into my sphere, purely because there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, I know it's influencing the industry, especially, the visual industry for sure. And Hollywood's impacted. I'm here in Hollywood at the moment. It's impacting their ability to make, stories and so on and so forth, helping, but also negatively impacting. But I think, for me, it doesn't matter how good the software gets. And maybe at some point, people are going to be able to type in, I want a lion with this light at this, and maybe you can already do it. I've never even looked. But I get paid to go out and not only to present, but to create that imagery on the spot, in situ, where there's that randomness of life and light and weather and cultures and clashes of cultures and faith and all of those sorts of things. So for me, it hasn't impacted me at all, because so much of what I do is in the first person. But I know and I'm not saying I'm trying to find something wooden here to knock. I'll knock steel. But I know for other parts of photography, it's had a major impact on their workflow. But for me so far, and hopefully that's not going to change, but people need me to be in the field doing what I do.
Well, talking about the storytelling side of stuff, if you've got an AI image, a lot of people still images online and then doctor them and so forth, but they clearly don't have the story about how you got that and the experience and what it felt like. And you're quite a raconteur. We're chatting before the episode. So that sort of side of stuff.
I mean, he looks like he is befriending a Galapagos tortoise. Literally, in one of his pictures, this tortoise looks like, hey, man, you've been hanging out with me for a very long time. Let's get to know each other and chat.
Yeah, but look, and that's the thing, isn't it, with storytelling? I mean, and maybe this is just, sort of our generation or whatever the case might be, but I actually don't completely understand. I understand that people get caught up in the challenge of creating this imagery, but some people, I must say, will not have the opportunity to necessarily go and swim with a shark or see an elephant in the wild, and I completely get that. And so they might get some, connection with nature through doing those sorts of things. But generally speaking, for me, I think to myself, wow, why would you create something that you would manifest as being real when it's not real? Work towards actually making it real. And that might sound a little bit egotistical, but I don't mean it that way at all. I mean to say that, there's so much you can do in life. For most people, not everyone have those opportunities, but, don't pretend just for likes or whatever. Just try and have some adventure, or if you're creating imagery, get out there and even locally and tell a story. There's so many stories to be told. I mean, when I started at Geographic, as Scarlett said, 25 years ago or something, I've been on the road now for more than 30, but I had to earn my stripes to get into Geographic. One of the first lessons I learned, and I was told by one of the editors at the magazine, we expect people who want to come into the magazine to shoot a story on their own suburb for 5 years. to show us that they can tell a story. If you're not willing to spend that amount of time looking locally at your own stories, why would we put you in the field?
Wow.
And I thought that was fascinating. So if anyone's sort of listening, your local environment can be a great place for you to learn to shoot a story. You just have to see it from an objective perspective.
Seriously, I want everyone to go, if you're on Instagram, go to @Jason Edwards NG. That's what it is. What's NG stand for? National Geographic?
National
Okay.
Geographic.
So yes. Okay. So go on @Jason Edwards NG and look at some of these photos. I mean, like, so now I realize when you actually do look at the eyes of these animals, it's like you did capture a story. You know what I mean? Like you captured a story. I see one of emaciated dog that looks like it's trying to eat a crumb or something like that on the street. But it's just incredible because not only did you capture its beauty of the surrounding area, but then you also see that the dog is thirsty. And I'm just really I think you're incredible. This is incredible. Like your pictures are completely moving, and I see why you're so famous. But how do you know? Is it like an internal feeling that you're like, pow, captured? You know what I mean? Or is it like you've been there watching them for a while, and you just take a bunch of photos, or do you just feel that magical moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, sometimes it just literally happens in that moment, and then I'm relying on decades of experience of reading the light and storytelling to make that moment work in my composition and shutter speed and depth of field and all of those kinds of things. And other times, I could be there for weeks or months, and it happens right at the last minute of months. But I think one of the most important things for me is that I'm very much in the moment when I'm working. And the cerebral side of it, Scarlett, is so intense because I have a rule for myself. It has to be better or different. Now, the better is not necessarily better than anyone else has ever done on the planet. How do you even measure that? It's crazy to think that way. So am I doing something better than I've done before for myself? Or is it different than someone else has done? But again, I don't Google other people's work. Is it just different than I've done before? So if I go to a location that I've never been, that is in the forefront of my mind, better or different, different or better. If I'm revisiting a place that I've worked in before because it's an ongoing story, then I've got that archive of work to go, okay, how can I see it differently? So I very much look for the minutiae, and then in my compositions, and this is something people always should think of, am I leading people into that moment? Are things too close to the edge of the frame? Am I leading them out of the story of the picture? Am I changing my elevation? Am I squatting? Am I standing on a chair? Am I holding the camera up above my head? Changing that perspective changes how the viewer sees the picture and how much is in focus versus how little's in focus. So when I'm working like that, I remember when at the time she was my partner, now she's my wife, I had the unenviable record of doing the most amount of work in Ranthambore for tigers without commercially usable work in India. I kept going back and back and back, and I'd see tigers and they were always too far away. And then my wife came, tigress walks out of the scrub with a couple of cubs, literally 1.5 meters from the 4-wheel drive. I start shooting, dun, 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 dun. Fast forward, I came back to reality, and I had my elbow on her forehead, my knee on her thigh. I'm 100 kilos, I was crushing this poor girl, and I'd been like that for 45 minutes. And when I looked down at her, I went, "Oh, g'day." And she sort of said, "Wow," not in a negative way. "I've never been made to feel so invisible in my life." And and my friends in the village who were guiding me, who were the same people I always worked with, they looked at Megan at Megs, and they sort of went, "Madam, don't you know who you married? This is who he is." This is literally, he goes somewhere else in the world, somewhere else in the universe when his eye's on the lens.
That's cool.
Where he is when he's with you and the rest of the world is not necessarily who he is, So that was a really interesting moment for her, I think. So I try not to put my 100 kilos with camera gear and everything on top of her head anymore
my
because
God, I know.
I'm aware now. So yeah.
That's hilarious.
But it is storytelling is complex, but it's also something that anyone can do. That's the thing. That's been one of my goals, over the decades, is to help people feel that this was accessible to them in some format, because it is. It is accessible to people to tell stories through their imagery, but you have to have a desire to do that, and also to learn from your mistakes. People don't like failure these days, it seems, but you have to, you have to fail and fail and fail
You
and
really
fail.
do. Yep. To grow. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, that's incredible. We have a lot more to chat about. We probably could keep going on and on, but we will need to stop the episode now before we get into another story. So stick with us, because we're going to talk about your book. And I'm really excited about this. Dr. Craken, thank you so much for being here too. And for everyone that's listening, thank you so much for being part of the Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew. Hey, Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew, don't forget to hit subscribe and follow us for future episodes. And also refer us. We'd love it. We would also like to hear from you, so please contact us on social media, or you can email us about a topic that you're interested in hearing about. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, or you would like us to come visit your science facility and do a live episode, email us at info@absolutelysmashingllc.com. This podcast was edited and produced by Absolutely Smashing. The music is produced by Jolly Shore Leave. Thank you again for listening, and we couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for being part of the Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew.